mess is the sort of word one can use at 6 a.m. To describe it, but the sort of words that Tory MPs and aides have been using in private, should we say, have been rather more fruity. But yes, as you point out, this is the fifth MP in the space of about 3 months to be accused of wrongdoing or involved in some way. We saw the by-elections last month caused by both Neil Parish being removed over Tractorgate, and then the even more serious sort of conviction of Imran Ahmed Khan. I don't want to insult the former Prime Minister of Pakistan for not allegations, for his conviction for sexual abuse. And so, yes, so what we know about the situation with Pincher is that the Carlton Club, he was at an event for the sort of Tory Friends of Cyprus where he gave a speech, and after the event he essentially consumed far too much alcohol, ended up groping. It was apparently two sort of separate male attendees. And then yesterday we had the farce, essentially, of while everybody knew that he was going to have the whip suspended at some point after he was asked to step down as Deputy Chief Whip, it took until the evening, actually, for the Prime Minister to finally boot him out. Yeah, so there's been criticism of his judgment that it took him that long, and it took a formal complaint to the parliamentary watchdog to do that. Is that fair? I think it is fair. I mean, not only because it seems a sort of fundamental double standard. You know, you may be absolutely horrified at Neil Parish watching pornography in the House of Commons chamber, but even I think the most sort of zealously puritanical of us would argue that that's not as bad as what Pincher has been accused of. And so I would say that to remove the whip so quickly from Neil Parish, but yet not to do so from Chris Pincher, seemed deeply incongruous, especially as the entire reason why Pincher was Deputy Chief Whip was that he had been a crucial member of the Prime Minister's shadow whipping operation back in January to try and shore up his position. So it almost looked like the Prime Minister was essentially letting a friend of his off with a sort of slapped wrist for what was frankly sort of appalling behaviour.
Yeah, and a lot of people will be questioning and are questioning Boris Johnson's judgment on giving him the job in the Whip's office in the first place, because he'd had to resign previously from a junior Whip job, hadn't he, because of very similar sorts of allegations.
Yes, exactly, very similar sort of
somebody said the Prime Minister didn't know, but he must have known. It was the talk of Westminster.
Well, also, we've got a story in the Telegraph today which said basically he had to be cleared by the sort of parliamentary ethics watchdog and before he could actually be appointed to the position. I actually remember, you know, the day back in January when he was appointed, and it took ages for this reshuffle to actually be completed. And now we know the reason why is apparently because he was being sort of shown to actually be of fit standard to actually hold this job. And remember, the Deputy Chief Whip is the person whose sort of job it is to handle pastoral issues. He's the person who's supposed to be keeping MPs in check over issues such as this. So for him to get himself into the state and to do what he's accused of doing is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, and senior Conservative MPs, Caroline Noakes and Karen Bradley, have written to the Whip's office, haven't they, saying that this could cause serious reputational damage. Are they right?
I think so.
Or has it already?
Well, I think it merely adds up to, you know, stories of everything from David Warburton to Neil Parish to Imran Ahmed Khan in recent weeks and months. It's essentially that the Tory party is kind of in the stage that it reached in the mid-90s where with the sort of John Major's Back to Basics campaign, where it seems that every single week there is another story about another Tory MP being a wrong-un. And it's impossible to get rid of that sort of air of sleaze once it's managed to take hold.
Yeah, no, we discussed this yesterday on the programme, and a lot of people got in touch saying, hang on a minute, these men are individuals and they may have behaved badly or not, but that's their individual choice. It's not Boris Johnson's fault. But if it continuously happens, you have to question the guy at the top, don't you?
Well, I think, you know, people would say that the fish rots from the head. And I don't think the Prime Minister has been accused ever of anything on sort of this scale of sort of appalling. Maybe not at all. I think that, in comparison, you can say with the Prime Minister's various peccadillos, there's nothing sort of comparable to this that he's been accused of. But frankly, you know, we've already come out of 6 odd months of anguish over Partygate, which has already dented the Prime Minister and the government's reputation in the eyes of so many. And things like this just add to the idea that the Tory party, A, thinks that there's one rule for it and one rule for everybody else, but B, that it's fundamentally mired in sleaze. And you know, as a conservative voter and party member and long-standing supporter, you know, it appalls me to be in the situation we are with the government, frankly, over issues like this at the moment.
Technical question, how long is this watchdog investigation going to take, and could it potentially lead to another by-election, do you think?
I'm not sure. I imagine it will be relatively swift, but I think even before it's concluded, I think there's the potential that Pincher will be asked to resign his seat. And remember, in Tamworth, he has a majority of about 19,000. It hasn't been sort of held by a Labour MP since about 2005, but we saw a majority of 24,000 overturned last week in Tiverton and Hollington. So I wouldn't say it's safe by any means.
But you could say to lose one MP is, you know, sad. To lose two is a bit, you know, dodgy. But to lose three is just darn careless.
No, exactly.
And it's more than that now. You can see it mounting, can't you? When we talk about... And the memories of the John Major government come flooding back, as you said, that he literally just couldn't keep a handle on MPs doing all sorts of terrible things all around him. But, of course, Tony Blair and New Labour were on the rise. And ultimately he lost to them. So there is no really magical opposition now, is there? So the argument is that Boris could still hold on almost by default.
Well, yes, no, I think we had a poll out from Ipsos Mori yesterday, which showed that essentially on all but sort of one metric now, the Tories are losing to Labour, and overall they're about 11 points behind. And now, as you say, sort of Tony Blair's once-in-a-generation style political figure, and the swings he actually managed to make from sort of former Tory voters were what made his majorities in both 2001 and 1997 so remarkable. But what I think the most likely outcome at the moment is, looking at all the available polling, is essentially we end up in a hung parliament next time round, with a sort of Labour minority government propped up by the Lib Dems and the SNP with some form of formal deal or not, which, of course, you know, as I say, as a Tory voter is not a particularly enticing prospect, but I think would probably be a fair judgment by the voters on the state of the government at the moment.
What would be what would be an enticing prospect if the Tories decided to get rid of Boris but hang on in there with another leader? Who would be the most enticing leader from your point of view, do you think?
Well, I mean, one doesn't want to sort of set the editorial policy, but I think from the sort of polling that we've seen, you know, there are two figures in the cabinet who are most well known by the public, which are Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid. I think Rishi Sunak, for all his recent travails, according to polling, simply because he's perhaps the most well known, is the person people would most like to see take over. And I think, as ever, SW1 has rather overcorrected from all the talk of him being the prince across the water to, in the last couple of months, writing him off entirely. I think the truth is, if and when a leadership election comes, it'll be incredibly volatile. I think, you know, if we'd been doing this, say, 3 or 4 years ago in May 2019, nobody would have really thought Boris Johnson would be Prime Minister in about 2 months. But events moved very rapidly then, and I'm sure they will again.
Yeah, you never know who's going to suddenly come up from the rear, do you?
Wouldn't it be nice if it was somebody really exciting?
Well, it would be, yeah. If there isn't, is there anyone in Parliament who's...
Well, I don't know. You know better than us, actually, the personalities.
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully there are some bubbling under... You know, good, talented personalities.
I mean, quite frankly, from the perspective of the Conservative Party at the moment, we'd not necessarily we'd happily settle for just not dodgy from the sort of headlines we'd be getting in MFPs. I don't know about exciting, but simply
boring
would be wonderful.
Right. Well, this is true. Yeah. Listen, William, really good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.